Hello everybody, it's Sylvie. Welcome or welcome back to Tarot Magpie. I hope you're doing all kinds of good today. I am bringing you today another episode of Magpie's Desk Dispatches, which is a very loose, casual series, but it is the kind of studio vlog type videos that I sometimes like to do. And I thought that I would bring you along, turn the camera on to kind of work through a spread that I've been making and see how it reads and see if I need to make any kind of changes to what I've been thinking. Because I have not pulled cards in a week, more than a week, because I've been super busy. I really miss pulling cards. I also don't have the energy to do anything in depth for myself. So I thought coming up with a pretend question to workshop this tarot spread I've been working on would be the perfect way for me to get to grips with some tarot and kind of get into it without having to actually think too hard about my own life and the consequences of my own actions. So you can see here this is my plotting and planning, my Tarot Magpie notebook, and this is a fire triangle spread that I have drafted because I am working on, what is hopefully going to turn into an elemental, possibly also court cards zine workbook, something along those lines. I've been doing some spreads. I've been doing lots of bits and pieces of connecting the court cards and the different elements and combining the elements and doing bits and pieces of writing and having thoughts. And I'm really enjoying getting into it. And I have been making spreads for each element. So we have the fire triangle for the fire element, got the plant cycle for the earth element, so on. I'm workshopping the fire triangle spread today, and I thought I'd switch my camera on and do it with you, let you kind of see the process, because I think that's really interesting. I'm nosy. I like seeing how people craft spreads, so I thought I would share that with you. So I'm gonna get more or less straight into it. So the fire triangle is ignition, fuel, and oxygen. They're the three elements you need to create and sustain a fire. So it is the basis for my fire element spread. I have my laptop to the side, which is where I've taken more extensive notes and started coming up with like keywords and things for spread positions. So fire is produced by a kind of chemical reaction, chain reaction, and fire elementally, in the way we look at it in tarot, is fire is an activating life force. Fire is passion and motivation, and then using real fire as the metaphor for the elemental fire and like the one suit, we have to be careful to control the burn or risk it burning out of control and being consumed by it. So with the ignition, the fuel, and the oxygen on the kind of real physics side, and also those keywords for the element of fire in the tarot, this spread is going to be a 3-card spread. It's intended for questions that are more about like purpose-driven work, going on a new adventure or following your passions. And maybe I'm thinking less for goal setting and more for goal getting. That sounds very cheesy, but you know what I mean. It's less for kind of what do I do and more how do I do it. So I've shuffled my cards. I'm using the Tarot del Fuego because it's a very fiery deck. And I am going to test this spread and pretend I have a client who has a business idea, wants to know how to make it successful. So we've got ignition, oxygen, and fuel. So ignition is the spark of heat that is needed for combustion, which is then going to contribute to the spread and sustainability of a fire. So in terms of a tarot position, it is when you know what you want, and this is what you need to kickstart that process. So our client, let's call them Leo, that's a fiery name. Leo has their business idea. They know what they want to do. They're purpose-driven. They've got the goals. They've got the plans. And this is the initial investment and commitment also to starting that metaphorical fire. You only need to ignite it once if you get it right. So we have the Ace of Cups representing the ignition. I know this is oxygen. I know this is fuel. I'm not sure which order I put them down in, but we're going to do fuel next. And the fuel in a fire is something combustible that burns. It keeps the fire going, and the type of fuel that you use will dictate how easily the fire does or does not burn. So here, this is about making whatever this metaphorical fire is into something that you can sustain, that Leo can sustain, and that they can see through to its conclusion and not burn out and give up halfway through. Sorry, there's too many good fire metaphors for tarot. So what I see the Fuel as being is something that, you know, you burn it, you can't get it back. So it ultimately represents your time and your energy. And this is kind of what you're putting into the business. And it's kind of a non-renewable resource in that sense. In your own personal life, this is something that you're not going to get back. So like make it worth it sort of thing. And we've got the Knight of Swords there. Okay, interesting. And then for oxygen, in a chemical reaction, in a fire, the oxygen reacts with the fuel to support the whole chemical process. And the air contains enough oxygen to usually keep any fire going. You know, think about a bonfire or a hearth fire in your home. You don't need to be feeding it oxygen. The oxygen in the air will do the trick. So I think of this as something that's like a bit more of a renewable resource in terms of the tarot spread. This isn't something that you have to be constantly feeding it in the same way as the Fuel is. And this might be something that feels a little bit more passive. And so this might be like, this is a supporting factor to the Fuel. It might be like a person or a support network. It might be an existing project or body of work that can support what you're doing in this new venture, like that kind of thing. And for this, we have the Ten of Cups. Okay, so this feels like a very, like, I swear I didn't pick these cards. This was very cliched with what I'm talking about, like purpose-driven work. And I think it's really interesting that we have cups, 2 water, and 1 air in the fire suit, or in the fire spread. But anyhow, so with the Ace of Cups representing the ignition, that like initial spark, I feel like the Ace of Cups is a wellspring. It is something that comes internally, and the Ace of Cups can be like renewal and healing and all of those things. But I also think the Ace of Cups is, it's at its core, it's emotions and feelings led. So this really supports that idea of the metaphorical fire having to be something that is purpose driven. It is kind of soul led with that Ace of Cups initial spark to it. I think the Knight of Swords as something combustible is really interesting actually, because the Knight of Swords I always think of as somebody who is idealistic, who is shoot first and ask questions later, can be a little bit arrogant, and who is kind of happy to be seen as arrogant and cocky because they are doing what they know to be right at the place and time that they're in with the information that they have. That doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with them or that they in the future are going to agree with their past actions, but they are following what they know to be true and real and right. So this is also very like purpose-led, passion-driven, you know, idealistic. They're following their truth. But I think this is interesting here because that's not necessarily sustainable. Like the Knight of Swords is air of fire, which is really interesting because obviously the fire triangle and then oxygen being one of the positions in this fire triangle. But anyhow, I think trying to be the Knight of Swords all the time is difficult and it'll burn you out. So it's kind of brings me back to that idea of the fuel that you use to feed a fire will dictate how easily it burns. And maybe this is also a little bit of a warning. Maybe this is something that is going to be difficult to sustain. Or maybe this is something that, the thing with the swords is that if you're not careful, you can cut people, right? So I think this is maybe something that, okay, you put all your time and energy into it, but you might be hurting people in the process or cutting people off by being so heart and mind and soul driven that you're kind of not caring who you run over. So perhaps this is a bit of a warning that whatever you're committing to has a high price to it. Perhaps. The Ten of Cups is oxygen. And it's funny to bring this up with the Ten of Cups so often being about family and about your personal circle and your personal, I think often of the Ten of Cups is like what is home to you, what is safety and security, and like who are your people, and like that's the Ten of Cups place. And then the Ten of Cups moment is the rainbows and butterflies, living in the moment and feeling very grounded and in touch with your emotions. With the oxygen perhaps representing like a person or a support network, like that's so clearly what this card is saying. But in contrast to the Knight of Swords, who is so like charge ahead, all guns blazing, I think the risk is neglecting this oxygen supply, or perhaps not giving this enough space. So having to be so committed can risk, like, you know, when you burn a fire in a closed container. Like, I remember doing that at school in like a science class when I was about 11, is we would burn a tea light candle in domes of different sizes to see that the one in the smallest dome would extinguish the quickest because it has the smallest oxygen supply. And so I think this is the equivalent of not giving this breathing room. And although I think of the oxygen supply as something that's like a bit more of a renewable or a passive resource, you still need to let it circulate. And so that kind of is at odds with this Knight of Swords energy, which is so all guns blazing, all commitment, and all not really caring who gets in the way. So to answer our imaginary querent's question, what do they need for their new business venture to be successful, and what do they need to do to make it a success? They've got to remember why they're doing it. Like, it's very clear that it is soul purpose driven and that it's gonna be a commitment. And like, it's cool to have the 1 and the 10. And I feel that also adds the idea of like, of commitment, because to get to the 10 is kind of a commitment, and then having both show up in the spread, and then also sitting with that kind of driven, passionate, idealistic, hot-headed Knight of Swords. I feel like there's a warning to not put too much fuel onto the fire, or not try and burn too high too quickly. I suppose if you put more fuel on the fire than you have oxygen to feed, then you risk it all just dying. So there's definitely a balance to be had, which is, you know, what the fire triangle is in the first place. It's the 3 elements that you need to sustain a fire. You need to have the heat, you need to have the oxygen, you need to have the fuel. So I'm more or less gonna leave that there in terms of the reading. Again, very hard to tell if I've successfully answered the question of somebody I made up. I like the way these cards talk to each other. I like the way the positions talk to each other. I like that the fire triangle is inherently something where you need to balance all 3 components. And I think that works really well in a spread format. Let me know what you think. I'd be interested. But yeah, I think that just about works. I think I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna type up some notes on my draft. I've got my laptop over here in my notes of like tweaking what the spread positions mean. And I'll probably do another couple of practice readings to see that it makes sense. But I like that. That's my fire triangle spread. I'm just curious who's on the back of the deck, because that's something I often look at. The 10 of Pentacles. Okay, so that feels successful, right? That is it, I think. I'm going to leave that there. I feel like I've spoken for a good long while, and I've definitely gotten some clarity on what I want to do with the spread. I think I like it. I'm going to go ahead with it. Watch this space to see what this ends up being. I will, of course, keep you posted. And no promises. I'm not sure when this video is going to go up, but I will try and write the spread up and stick it on my blog, so I can link you to that if you want to give this a go, which I would think is very cool that people use my spreads. So like, I can't get over that. Like, I have that little zine that I've put on Etsy, and the fact that people have downloaded it and used my little 3-card spreads is so freaking cool to me. So let me know if you give this spread a go and what you think of it. And yeah, I'm going to leave you there. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed a peek, kind of a little bit behind the scenes, how I not come up with a spread, but how I kind of road test a spread a little bit. I think spread crafting is really cool. It's one of my favorite things to do. It's one of the things I find really interesting, like seeing how the cards talk to each other in a reading. So yes. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me. I really hope you've enjoyed. Give me a like if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.